Ever dream of becoming Canadian? Well, you're in the right place. We're diving deep into the world of Canadian citizenship today, and we've got all the official government resources to help us along.
We're going to make you an expert on how to become Canadian.
No more endless Google searches, right?
Exactly. And trust me, you'll want to be an expert on this because there are a ton of misconceptions floating around out there.
Like what? Give me an example. What's the biggest myth people fall for when it comes to Canadian citizenship?
Oh, that's easy. It's definitely that if you marry a Canadian, you automatically become one too.
Really? I could see how people would think that.
Yeah, you'd think it would be that simple, right? But the Canadian government is very clear on this point. Just because you're married to a Canadian doesn't mean you get instant citizenship. You still have to go through the entire application process.
Wow, okay. So no shortcuts for lovebirds. What about family ties, though? Like if you have Canadian parents or even grandparents, does that make a difference?
It actually might. Sometimes people are already Canadian citizens and they don't even realize it. Especially if you've got Canadian relatives, it's worth doing some digging. You never know what you might uncover.
Wow, what a plot twist. Okay, so say you find out your great Aunt Susan was actually born in Canada. What then? What's the very first step towards figuring out your own path to citizenship?
The key is having permanent resident status. It's kind of like the foundation for becoming a citizen.
Okay, so break it down for me. What does it actually mean to be a permanent resident?
Basically, it means you have the right to live in Canada indefinitely. There's a catch, though. You agree to certain conditions when you're granted that status.
Oh, so you have to keep those promises to keep your permanent resident status.
Exactly. And that's why it's a good idea to dig out those original permanent resident documents of yours. You want to make sure you're still meeting those requirements.
Got it. So let's say you've got your permanent resident status all sorted. You're feeling good. Time to start planning the citizenship party, right?
Not so fast. Time is a big factor, but it's not as easy as just being in Canada for a little while.
Oh, what's the catch?
You have to have physically lived in Canada for at least 1,095 days.
Wow, 1,095? That's oddly specific.
It is. That's 3 years, by the way. And this has to be within the 5 years before you even think about applying. And like I said, you have to have physically lived here.
Okay, so if I go on vacation for a week, does that mess things up?
Vacations are fine. It's more about proving that Canada is your primary place of residence, you know? A travel journal can be a lifesaver here, by the way. Keeps track of all those comings and goings.
Good to know. So I should start jotting down those trips to see my family in Europe, just in case.
You got it. And another pro tip, if you're even thinking about applying for citizenship down the road, always aim to be in Canada for longer than the minimum requirement, just in case.
Longer than the 1,095 days. Why is that?
Well, not all time spent in Canada counts the same way. Remember those conditions that come with permanent resident status?
Oh, right.
Yeah. So let's say you were here on a student visa or a temporary work permit before you became a permanent resident. Those days only count as half towards the citizenship requirement.
Wait, really? I'm a little confused. Can you give me an example?
Sure. Let's say you lived in Canada on a student visa for 2 years before getting your permanent resident status.
Okay, so that's
730 days.
right, 730?
Only half of those days would actually count towards your 1,095-day requirement.
Oh, wow, that's tricky.
It is, and that's why it's super important to understand the rules and keep very good records.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned something earlier about time spent outside Canada, counting towards the requirement if you're a crown servant.
What exactly does that mean?
It sounds very official, doesn't it? Basically, a crown servant is someone who is employed by the Canadian Armed Forces, the federal government, or the public service of a province or territory.
Okay, so there are special rules for them. Exactly. See, for most people, only the time they've lived in Canada counts towards that magic 1,095-day requirement. But for crown servants, time spent working outside of Canada might actually count towards their residency, depending on their specific role.
Wow. So if you're working for Canada, but you're stationed in, say, Germany, that time could still count towards your citizenship.
You got it. It all depends on the specifics, of course, but that's why it's so important to do your research, so that there might be a rule you've never even heard of that applies to your situation.
It's like those secret levels in video games. You discover a hidden shortcut that changes the whole game.
That's a great way to put it, except unlike a video game, you don't really get unlimited tries with the citizenship application.
Okay, so we've talked about the time requirement, that magic number of 1,095 days. What else do people need to know about before they even think about applying to become Canadian?
Well, this might surprise you, but your tax history is important too.
Really? Taxes? I thought we were talking about becoming Canadian, not my least favorite time of year.
It's all connected. You see, when you participate in the Canadian tax system, it shows you're committed to the country. So, to be eligible for citizenship, you'll likely need to have filed your taxes for at least 3 of the past 5 years.
Oh, I see. So it's like saying, hey, I'm not just living here, I'm a contributing member of society. Okay, what about language skills? I know that's a big one.
You're right, it is a big one. Canada has two official languages, English and French, and anyone applying for citizenship between the ages of 18 and 54 needs to prove they can speak one of them well enough to live here.
Okay, so how do you actually prove your language skills
Yeah.
to the government? Do you have to, like, write an essay or something?
It's not so much about formal writing, it's more about showing you can use either English or French in everyday life. Can you have a conversation, understand what people are saying, things like that? The government will look at things like language test scores if you have them, diplomas or certificates from English or French schools, that kind of thing. They might even use your interactions with the citizenship officials to judge your language skills.
So if someone aced their high school French class, now's the time to show off those skills.
Mm.
But what if your French is a little rusty? Or you're still working on your English? Are there options for those people?
Of course. The government gets that everyone is coming from a different place, so there are accommodations and waivers available for those who need them.
That's good to know. Okay, so you've got your paperwork in order. You've proven you can speak one of the official languages.
Yeah.
What's next? Is there like a pop quiz on all things Canada?
You could say that. It's time for the citizenship test.
Oh boy. Okay. That's the part I'd be most nervous about. What kind of questions are on the test?
It covers all kinds of topics, really Canadian history, geography, the way the government works, Canadian laws, what your rights and responsibilities would be as a citizen, that sort of thing.
Wow. Okay. That's a lot. Is there a giant textbook I'm supposed to memorize?
Don't worry, there's a free study guide published by the government called Discover Canada: The Rights and Responsibilities of Citizenship. You can read it online for free, download it as an audiobook, even order a paper copy. They've made it super easy.
Oh, okay. That's a relief.
Hmm.
What's the test itself like?
It's multiple choice and true or false questions, 20 questions total. You've got 45 minutes, which is plenty of time, and you need to get at least 15 of those questions right to pass.
So it's not about memorizing every single date and fact, more like understanding what it really means to be Canadian.
Exactly. And if you're someone who gets really nervous about tests, you've got options. While most people are invited to take the test online these days, you can also take it in person or even through Microsoft Teams.
Oh, wow. Technology to the rescue. It seems like they've really tried to make the process as user-friendly as possible.
Right.
Okay, so let's say you pass the test. Congratulations. What happens next?
Now comes the really exciting part. It's time to take the oath of citizenship.
The oath of citizenship. It sounds so official. What is that exactly?
Basically, it's a promise you make to Canada. You're pledging your loyalty to the country, promising to obey the law, and to be a good citizen. It's a really meaningful moment.
I bet it's emotional for a lot of people.
It really is. And just like all the other steps in this process, accommodations are available for the oath as well. The government really wants to make sure everyone feels included.
It sounds like the Canadian government has really thought of everything to make the process as accessible as possible.
I think so. They really seem to understand that this is a really significant event in people's lives.
For sure. Okay, so you aced your test, you've taken the oath, you're officially Canadian. But hold on, what about the actual application process itself? There's a lot to that, right?
Yeah, you're right. The paperwork can seem a bit overwhelming. But don't worry, we're going to break it all down.
Perfect, because I don't know about you, but I tend to panic a little when I hear the words paperwork and government in the same sentence. Okay, so first things first, online or paper application.
Most of the time, the Canadian government wants people to apply online. It's usually faster and easier than doing paper forms.
But there are some exceptions, like when would you have to apply on paper?
If you're a Crown servant applying based on time you spent outside Canada, you'd need to use a paper application. And the same thing goes if you're using a representative to help with your application.
Hold on, a representative. Tell me more about that.
Sure. So a representative is basically anyone you choose to help you navigate the process: a friend, a family member, a paid immigration consultant. They can offer advice, make sure you understand all the instructions, and even communicate with the government on your behalf.
So it's like having a citizenship coach in your corner.
Exactly. But keep in mind, even with a representative, you're still ultimately responsible for your own application. You have to provide accurate info and make sure everything is complete.
Because an incomplete application is a no-no, right?
Big time.
Yeah.
Missing documents, little mistakes, even careless oversights. All of those things can lead to big delays or even
So
rejections.
triple check everything.
Absolutely. Take your time and get it right. The last thing you want is to give them any reason at all to delay your application.
Okay, so your application's all in, perfectly filled out, all the documents, everything's there. Now what? Do you just like sit and wait nervously by the mailbox?
Well, not quite. Communication is key from here on out. You
Yeah.
really want to keep an eye on any correspondence coming from Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada.
IRCC, right.
That's the one. So, yeah, you don't want to miss any updates from them.
Makes sense, but let's be real, sometimes those official emails can get lost in the shuffle. What's the best way to make sure you don't miss anything important?
Good question. First of all, double check that IRCC has your current contact info. And don't forget to check your spam folder. You wouldn't believe how often important emails end up there.
Oh, for sure. I've definitely done that before. Okay, so you're checking your inbox religiously, but then life happens, right? Maybe you move house, maybe there's a family emergency, you have to travel unexpectedly. Do you need to tell IRCC about every little change like that while you're waiting?
It's always better to be safe than sorry. A quick trip for a long weekend probably isn't a big deal, but a change of address or any big change to your travel plans, yeah, let IRCC know.
Just so they're in the loop. Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about those situations where you really need an answer fast? I've heard people talk about urgent processing. Is that a real thing?
Well,
Or is it a myth?
It's definitely real, but unfortunately, there's no magic urgent button you can just press. There are specific situations where you can apply for urgent processing, though, like if you need to travel for a medical emergency or there's a family situation, that means you need to be in a different country right away and you need your citizenship to do that.
So it's only for very specific circumstances.
Yeah, exactly. It's there to help people who are dealing with a real time sensitive crisis, not just because they're impatient.
Of course, that makes sense. Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. It's incredible how much there is to know about becoming a Canadian citizen. As we wrap things up here, what's the one big takeaway you hope our listeners are walking away with today?
Honestly, I think the most important thing to remember is that becoming Canadian isn't about just ticking boxes on a form. It's about embracing everything it means to be part of this country.
It's a commitment to our values, our laws, to the future of Canada.
Exactly. It's bigger than just getting a passport. It's about wanting to be a part of Canadian society.
Perfectly said. And there you have it, your crash course in how to become a Canadian citizen. We hope you're feeling informed, empowered, and maybe even inspired to start your own citizenship journey. Until next time, happy learning.